The safety of Canadians is the number one thing that any government, that any parliamentarians should be preoccupied with, and that is exactly what we're focused on. There will be time to talk about internal party intrigue at another moment, but right now, this government, and indeed all parliamentarians, should be focused on standing up for Canada's sovereignty, standing against interference, and looking to be there to support Canadians in this difficult moment.
That's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responding to questions this week about a push by some Liberal MPs to oust him. On Friday, CTV News reported that a group of backbench MPs, primarily from Atlantic Canada and southwestern Ontario, are in discussions to formally release an ask for the Prime Minister to reconsider his future as the leader of the Liberal Party. The push to formally organize started in earnest last week after a caucus meeting the Prime Minister and his top staffers did not attend because they were out of the country at the ASEAN summit in Laos. Just minutes ago, I asked Liberal MP Anthony Housefather about those reports. Here's what he had to say.
I support whoever is the leader of my party at all times, but that doesn't mean there shouldn't be a robust caucus discussion about who the best person to lead us in the next election is. And that discussion should happen in caucus. It shouldn't happen in the media.
So can the Prime Minister survive the pressure for him to step aside? Let's bring in the front bench. With me tonight, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada now. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you tonight. Brian, I'll start with you. How significant do you think this push is, and can the Prime Minister withstand it, do you think?
It's significant. There's no question when you have a big reportedly a big part of your caucus that's willing to sign a letter, allegedly again. Nobody's seen anything, but that's what's been being reported, and sort of the leaks have been confirming that's a big deal. And if only because it is a huge distraction when it comes to your messaging for external purposes with Canadians. But even more importantly, if it starts to get traction and actually becomes something that really starts to have the Prime Minister in his office debate the future of his leadership. Can it work? Sure. I mean, you've certainly seen in the past parties have sort of revolts that end up in some type of action. We saw it south of the border with Biden when he didn't perform very well, to say the least, in the debate, and didn't want to do it. But there was a movement, and with all the pressure, he ended up making his choice. Now, that said, he can also survive it. Look at New Brunswick. A year ago, there was probably 12, 13 MLAs in Blaine Higgs's government that resigned, that said they weren't reoffering. Some of them specifically said that they were not impressed with Higgs's leadership, and it was because of that. And he's running as we speak in the election. He survived it. They changed the channel when it really started to rev up, and he survived, and he's fighting the next election, fighting the current election, I should say. So it's definitely something he can survive. Is
there a channel changer, do you think, Lisa, that the Prime Minister and his team could put in the window that ultimately would distract or move people's attention from the idea that, let's say, at least 20 people in his caucus want him out?
I don't think so, Vassy. And I find it interesting. Somebody reminded me today that if you go for the king, you better not miss, right? Because there's going to be retribution at the end of the day. But I think some of the MPs are sitting there and really taking a really hard look at their risk assessment. So they're in their community. They're getting hammered by the people around them, telling them what they think about Mr. Trudeau and the fact that they're not going to be able to vote for them in the next election. And they wonder to themselves, am I better off at least showing that I tried to do something about this, that at least I stood up for what I stood for? Is that a line that they can use on the doors when they are seeking re-election under Mr. Trudeau? Possibly that's what they're thinking, that it's better for them to be able to say to their community, look, I tried, they didn't listen to me, but you know where I am. Send me back to Ottawa and I'll continue to do the good work, but please spare me. And I think that's what this is about right now. There's 20 MPs out there saying, how do I make sure that I disconnect myself from this leader if he's going to take us into the next election, so that I can say in full face to my community, look, I tried and they're just not listening. And yeah, I got punished a little bit. But I don't know whether or not Mr. Trudeau will go as far as to not sign nomination papers, because then you got a lot of independents running in these communities.
What does it say, Tom, if those MPs are thinking that way, that they are, though?
It says that they know how to read the polls and they understand that they're, as Lisa just said, they're heading for slaughter in the next electoral slaughter in the next election. This is the second time, Vassy, that Mr. Trudeau has pulled the exact same card out of his deck to try to get out of a tough spot. Just over a year ago, he opened Parliament with allegations against India. Now, 13 months later, he's on a long weekend. He's back from Laos. People want to know what his reaction is to this palace coup. And he says, we're not going to get into party intrigue. I'm busy here taking care of Canadians' safety. It sounds very dramatic, but it doesn't take away from the issue. I've had the same impression that a lot of people have shared. I just did my French panel show, and the sense was, well, this is something being cooked up in Ontario and Atlantic Canada. And lo and behold, I just heard your great interview with Anthony Housefather, who is an MP right here in Montreal, where I am. And I don't think he could have been clearer. He's part of the discussion to try to see who the best person is to lead them into the campaign. Because like a lot of those other people, even though he's in what was always considered a very safe Liberal riding, we've learned that there's no such thing as a safe Liberal riding anymore. So does Mr. Trudeau have, to your question, to Lisa, does he have anything that he can do that could dramatically change the channel? I'll suggest one thing. It's the only one that he's got. He walks out of Rideau Cottage, across the lawn to Rideau Hall, walks in, knocks on the bed, and asks for Mary Simon to give him an electoral writ. About the only other thing that he can do is called prorogation. We've talked about that. That is simply pulling the emergency brake before his political train goes off the tracks and tries to hit some sort of reset. Would that take the form of a leadership vote? Would that take another form? Who knows? But at this stage of the game, there's not much left from Mr. Trudeau. And I have a little bit more sympathy than most watching a leader go through this sort of thing. But when you have somebody like Anthony Housefather getting in on that conversation, that means that things have really changed within his caucus. And he's always been very good at dominating his caucus.
Mm-hmm. I think to Tom's point, Rob, and you and I have been speaking about this, like even though on the record everyone's saying no to prorogation, you've got to think there's a very active discussion right now. I don't know what other lever they have to push at this point in time to just even press pause for a moment. Otherwise, you're looking at the possibility of being amongst all these MPs who want you out in Parliament Hill next week.
Well, exactly, Vassy. Do you really want, if you're Justin Trudeau, to have, 100+ Liberal MPs gathering in a room, a caucus room, and kvetching? Because these folks have just been in their riding on Thanksgiving week. They'll have been by next week. And they'll have been talking to their constituents and their families and their friends and neighbors. And you're going to hear, I think, in the coming weeks, a bunch that are going to say they're not going to run again for lots of reasons, want to spend more time with the family, yada, yada, yada. But it's mostly about their own survival, their own professional survival. And remember, these folks are, they're franchisees, right? In each of their riding, they represent the Liberal Party. So do they want to represent the Justin Trudeau Liberal Party, or do they want to represent the Liberal Party that they could get reelected in? And this is we saw this here. I'm in Toronto, and we saw it in St. Paul's in June. Justin Trudeau was on the cover of the conservative Don Stewart's literature because that was the ballot question here in Toronto. It was the ballot question where Tom is in Montreal, in David Lamette's riding, Paul Martin's old riding. They lost to the Bloc Québécois. So there isn't a safe Liberal seat right now, and Liberal MPs know that. They've been talking to their friends and family this last week, and they'll be doing so a little bit more later this week. I think next week is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, that's the understatement of the year. Brian, do you have a gut feeling on whether or not, if someone else does take over, it means a different outcome for the Liberals ultimately?
If there's a new leader, I think first off, I'll put the caveat of my opining on that question of he is the leader. He was nominated by the party. He was elected by Canadians, and
I'm asking you a hypothetical.
And he has the confidence of the House, right? So I think we always have to sort of remind ourselves of those important pieces. That said, I think if you had another leader, it's a bit of, I don't know if it's the right term to use, but a Hail Mary in the sense that you could have a new leader come in with very little time. So that could actually maybe be a little worse when you think about it, to be, if you really put in context. But there are, as we know, a lot of people thinking about it, a lot of good candidates that would want to take on the role, and maybe they could do better, and maybe they could swing things around. Maybe they're different enough just to get a little bit of traction. And although there'll only be probably a small window, maybe it's a window that's large enough for them to be able to get enough traction with Canadians. Or maybe they just do better and they don't form government, but maybe they got more seats. Those are all possibilities that the party could think about.
Lisa, do you have a gut feeling on whether it would make a difference?
No, I don't think. I think the cast is. I think it's. I think the die
That's more
is cast.
concise than me, Lisa. That's a little more concise.
Yeah, sorry. I know. I think we have what we have, folks, and regardless of what's happening internally right now and the excitement of what next week brings, I don't know whether or not it's going to make much of a difference. I think we are where we are.
Tom, I've got 30 seconds left. What do your instincts say on that? Last word to you.
My gut instinct is we're heading for prorogation, a leadership, and the departure of Mr. Trudeau at the beginning of 2025.
Well, very specific
Wow.
prescription there. Interesting. Okay, lots to check in on.